over in the ERC seminar room to help you upload your presentations. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ed Buskey, the president of the University of Texas Marine Science Institute. So thank you very much.
Okay, well, thanks, Joan. And boy, it's great to see so many people here. So welcome again to the Texas Bays and Estuaries meeting. So this meeting's been going on for, I think, about a couple of decades, although we missed a few years after Hurricane Harvey. So Hurricane Harvey until shortly after the pandemic, we didn't hold the meeting. But I think it actually even went on before that time, although we don't really have the programs from it that we have on our website. But anyways, this meeting's been going on for quite some time. And also, welcome to the University of Texas Marine Science Institute. So anybody here who hasn't been at UTMSI before? Well, there's a few. Okay. Well, anyway, so we're an organized research unit of the University of Texas at Austin. So we're actually part of UT Austin, 200 miles away. And we're also a department within the College of Natural Sciences at UT Austin. So we're part of the So we're the only department that's not located in Austin. So anyway, but here we have mainly graduate studies. We do also have undergraduates in a semester by the sea program. So there's some undergraduates on campus right now. But again, we do a little bit more research. So it's research and graduate degrees here primarily. And, you know, as they say in real estate, location, location, location. So, I mean, this is really just a perfect location for a Marine Science Institute. So there's the ship channel right there. You'll see huge oil tankers and LNG ships going by just about all day long. Gulf of Mexico is right there. The Intracoastal Canal that connects to all the estuaries on the coast is just a short distance from here. We have our own marina, and we're in the process of building a new research vessel for our institute. So again, we'll have that capability in the future. Anyway, so we have a 62-acre campus here in this location, and then we have a 10-acre campus on the backside of the island. So anyway, we're also, this is, I think Joan already mentioned it, but this is going to be one of the biggest meetings we've ever had. I think we have over 200 people registered for it. We have, I think, 40 posters, which I think about 30 is about the most we've ever had before. So again, this is going to be a great meeting. And concurrent sessions, as she already mentioned. So, and you know, of course, it's a lot of work to organize a meeting like this. So I just like to mention I'm not going to mention everybody by name, but primarily this was organized by personnel from the Mission Aransas National Estuarine Research Reserve. So I don't know, anybody that was involved with organization that's in the room right now, maybe just raise your hand. A few, well, couple. All right, anyway, so thank you all for coming. And I hope the meeting leads to some new collaborations and understanding and appreciation for our coastal environment here in Texas. So who's our first session chair?
Welcome back to the start of Sediment Processes and Hydrodynamics. We have Randy Bissell starting us off with In Search of the Historic Corpus Christi Pass and the U.S. Civil War Affair at Padre Island. Sounds very...
Thank you. Hey, I'm Randy Bissell. I'm I think, one of the few geologists that does anything out here, but I love to come out here and speak to this group because I know you guys are all fascinated with our Texas coast and its evolution and its morphology. So I'm going to talk a little bit about history, the intersection of history and geomorphology and our coastal changes in our landscape. The thing I want you to do first is set aside your opinion about what anything is called out here in terms of Mustang Island, Padre Island, Packery Channel, Corpus Christi. I want you to set aside all of your preconceptions about what your geography looks like, because we're going to roll back the clock 150 years and we're going to consider the geography around the period of the Civil War in the 1860s. And so in order to do that, we have to strip off all the labels, most of the labels, and we have to kind of reaffix them in slightly different places. And I hope the objective of this, as you drive back to Corpus Christi, or if you do drive back to Corpus Christi today, that you'll look at the landscape a little bit differently, because there is a lot of history hidden in plain sight along our Texas coast. And that was one of the ventures that we were on with this presentation. All right, so it all starts in the office of a friend named Jim Maloney, who's a local historian, who had this picture hanging on his wall, this painting. And I'd seen it for a couple of years, and then about a year ago, I was in his office, and I looked at that picture, and I said, where is that? Where is this happening? Okay, and so what this is a painting by a guy named Gamble. It was painted in 1863, several months after this event happened. What this event depicts is a battle in the Corpus Christi Pass between Confederate forces and Union forces during the Civil War. Just a slight history, Corpus Christi was an important seaport for the Confederacy. Texas was trying to export cotton and other goods. The Union wanted no part of that. The Union set up a blockade in the Gulf of Mexico, and they were preventing the movement of supplies into and out of the Confederacy. Texas wanted to continue to trade with French and British traders, mainly cotton, and they needed the money. And so these ports, these passes between the mainland of Texas and the Gulf of Mexico were critical. One of those passes was Corpus Christi Pass. And we'll talk more about where was this Corpus Christi Pass. Again, there's a sign, you drive by it, it says Corpus Christi Pass. That's not the pass we're talking about. The original Corpus Christi Pass. So let me just point out some things in this painting. This is a painting of December the 7th, 1862. We're looking to the east. So to the right-hand side or to the south is Padre Island. To the north is Mustang Island. That ship is depicted as the Confederate state ship, the Queen of the Bay. The Queen of the Bay was sent into Corpus Christi Pass with a couple of launches to sound the pass, to make sure that they could get in and out, because there were no reinforcements. The pass was subject to change all the time. It was a tidal pass, and so its navigability was a critical question. Out in the Gulf, you see the USS Author. That's a ship about the size of the Alyssa, if you've ever been on the Alyssa in Galveston, same type of bark. It had launched two smaller boats into the pass to intercept the Confederates, and those two boats are depicted in the foreground. The Confederates have taken the high ground on Padre Island, and the Union sailors find themselves haplessly adrift in the channel 30 or 40 feet below. Now, do I have any hunters in the room? Anybody that shoots? Notice the disadvantageous position of the Union forces. Also, to add to this, the Confederates were armed sharpshooters out of Seguin. They were expert riflemen, and they were shooting deer guns. The Union soldiers had smooth-bore muskets. They had marine weapons. And so this is an incredible disadvantage. That's reflected somewhat in the, notice the Confederate guy, he's over there happily waving his hat. He doesn't seem to be affected at all by the defensive need, whereas the Union soldiers are not doing so sporty. The other thing that's occurring in this picture that you may not, you won't appreciate is that a norther blew in that day. And so the wind is blowing from north, from left to right. And so the Union soldiers are having to paddle against the wind to get away from the hail of gunfire from the Confederates. There were only about 12 or 13 Confederates. There were 22 or so Union soldiers and sailors in the two boats. And so what ultimately happens here is the Union soldiers, they land over on Mustang Island and they begin running northward, carrying their wounded. But the wind actually took their two boats and pushed them over to the Padre Island side. And so at the end of that day, the 12 or 15 Union soldiers had to go all the way, march all the way up to Port Aransas. That's a 20-mile walk. And of course, the Confederates considered it a great victory. Not only did they not have any wounded or any casualties at all, they also had the supplies in the two Union boats and one or two of the dead and wounded, maybe 3 dead and wounded in the boats. And so that's why it's called the affair at Padre Island, is because the Union didn't want to call it the humiliating defeat at Padre Island. So they framed it, oh, what are we going to talk about? It's the affair at Padre Island. But it's this. And so my question to Jim Maloney is, where is this today? I want to go to this spot. I want to see this spot. Well, it just so happens there's a second painting. Noakes and Gamble were rivals, and both of them in 1863 produced paintings to sell, because for the Confederates, for Texas Confederates, it's a great victory, right? They wanted to sell, so they sold paintings. So the Noakes painting, instead of looking to the east, it looks to the north. And so here are the Confederates on Padre Island shooting down onto the Union forces, slightly different depiction of the style of boats and stuff, but the same cast of characters. Here's Padre Island, there's Mustang Island, there's the USS Author out in the distance. It cannot assist in any way possible because it's a deep draft ship. It can't come up onto the beach. It sent its 2 launches in to find the Confederates. And then, so those 2 launches were lost ultimately. So the Union soldiers couldn't get back out to the Author because they didn't have their boats anymore. They had lost their boats. Those boats had washed up at the feet of the Confederate soldiers. And there's the Queen of the Bay. All right, so this is where you have to kind of reset your mind clock. And I'm going to say this, and I want you to notice north is to the right. In 1860 up to about 1930, Corpus Christi Pass extended from present-day Whitecap Beach almost due north to south of Shamrock Cove, along the backside, very close backside of Mustang Island. And that's what this drawing, or this map from the Texas Coastal Survey in the mid-1800s depicts. So here is Whitecap Beach. The entrance to the Gulf of Mexico was at Whitecap Beach, and this extended along the backside. So you'll notice if you're coming down 361, you'll notice that you'll start to get into areas where we get really wetland on the backside of Mustang Island. The reason is you're driving over the old Corpus Christi Pass. The road has replaced the pass. And so what these marks in here indicate are soundings from this survey. So they were constantly having to sound this pass. And again, this is right along the backside of the island. Okay, so that was Corpus Christi Pass. A lot of people, and I'll show you another map in a second. virtually all of the passes in South Texas were north-south, not east-west. The one at Rockport, the Lydia Ann Channel, is the old Aransas Pass. It goes south to north from Port Aransas to Rockport. Originally, it didn't really even go into Corpus Christi Bay. There was very small waterway into the bay. And so the Corpus Christi was the Confederate stronghold, and the Union forces occupied Port Aransas and they controlled the Gulf. And as best I can tell, the battle took place based on the pictures, based on the anecdotes, the writings. It took place near the mouth of the pass at about the present day Whitecap Beach, which you would have never suspected that you were standing on the original trace of the channel at that location. But I'll show you why here in a second. So a different perspective with north being up, just to recap what happened that day, the Confederate ship Queen of the Bay came out of Corpus Christi, sailed down the pass. They were sounding the pass. At the same time, the Union ship, the Author, came into the Gulf, and they released their launches to hover here at the opening of the pass to intercept the Confederates, thinking that 22 would be plenty. Well, what happened was the rebels landed on the Confederate side, or on the Padre Island side, and began firing down on the Union forces. They escaped to the Mustang side. And then because they lost their boats, they ended up having to hoof it all the way to Port Aransas with dead and wounded. Okay? And the Confederates collected up all the Union stuff, and they just sailed right back to Corpus Christi to celebrate their victory. All right? But what's really amazing is that we have these two paintings that are in private collections that aren't really publicly available, but they both depict that account. And the Gamble painting is the G, and it shows his perspective, and the Noakes painting shows his looking north. So that's really kind of cool. All right, and so let's come back to a map from the 1890, just to let y'all know that Ropesport never happened, but this is the old Ropes map. What I want you to notice, north is in that direction, that the original Corpus Christi Pass is depicted quite accurately on this map, going from south to north, from approximately Whitecap Beach to south of Shamrock Island. And at the same time, the Lydia Ann Channel and the original pass to the north goes from south to north, from Port Aransas up to Rockport. Oh, 2 minutes. Man, I got to hurry. All right. So just to tell the story, we have all of these things that are affecting the present day lay of the land out here. And one of the things to remember is that with our Corpus Christi Intercoastal Waterway and the Packery Channel, we have replaced the necessity of the original pass. So its waterway function has been eliminated. And because of that, it's filling with sediment. You'll also notice that when you go to the south side of Packery Channel, you're actually on what used to be Padre Island. I'm sorry, used to be Mustang Island. Now it's referred to as Padre Island. So this little spit of land south of the Packery Channel is actually Mustang Island. All right, and so why has it gone away? These great pictures from Richard Watson here in Port Aransas. He's photographed over the years all of these storm events that have done nothing but push sediment into the historic Corpus Christi Pass. And so that's where the pass went. It went away because of the Intercoastal Waterway, the new Packery Channel, and these storm events. There's been no reason for nature to clean it out. If you're looking for it today, we can combine LiDAR and these overlays, and we can begin to find, there is in blue the trace of the original Corpus Christi Pass, the landmarks of Packery Channel, Whitecap Beach, Newport Pass, and you can see Packery Channel cuts off the southern end of Mustang Island. Yeah, I'm out of time. All right, so I'm going to just show you I'm going to end with some pictures. If you go to the corner of Windward and Whitecap, you're standing at the battle site. If you look to the north at Lake Padre, there are sections of Lake Padre that represent the old pass. If you're on Zahn Road and look to the north, you'll see the old pass. that's the church in the distance. And if you're behind the Methodist church and look north, you can see that the pass has almost been completely obliterated. Is there a sign? No. But the Corpus Christi Historical Commission says there's going to be a sign, but I don't think they're going to put it in the right spot. So I've got to continue to beat on them about where they're going to put the sign. And thank you. Sorry that took so long, but I really like my talk.
No, thanks. Okay, next up, we are going to hear from Ian Fisher on Packery Channel Nature Park Shoreline Enhancement.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name's Ian Fisher. I'm a coastal engineer down in Rockport with Anchor QEA. And I'm going to talk about the current situation at Packery Channel, not too far from the affair at Padre Island, I guess. So this is an Oasis County project. It's funded by the General Land Office as a CMP project of special merit. So shout out to my CMP project managers in the audience. And we're up here, Port A, UTMSI. So this is just down Mustang Island and Padre Island, right here along Packery Channel, which is now, as we learned, the hydraulic connection between the Laguna Madre and the Gulf. And this is a project area. This is a county park. It's pretty heavily recreated. Lots of wade fishing, lots of people throwing their lawn chairs out there and just hanging out on the weekend. But it's been pretty heavily eroding over time. You can see it's subject to winds from the north, which are more common in the winter when we get those cold fronts. Also a little bit from our predominant southeast winds. Obviously vessel wakes. These markers here are where the no wake zone starts going that way. So you have boats coming off plane, getting up on plane right here at the park. And then these homes here to the south are all bulkheaded. So you have wave reflection and refraction there at these bulkheads just bouncing back and eroding that shoreline away. So when we started looking at this project, we want to collect all the data that we can. So looking at existing data and collecting new data. So existing data, the important stuff here is that Conrad Blucher Institute has been doing bathymetric surveys out here since 2004. So you can see some of the transects there on the right. And then over here on the left, you can see some of the erosion rates. On the far left, you have pre and post 2020 storm season rates, and then from baseline to post 2020 storm season there on the right. So you can see erosion rates of 1 to 3 feet per year, depending on the transect location. We also wanted to collect geotechnical borings to see what kind of sediment we're dealing with. We do that for a number of reasons. One of the primary reasons, though, is to look at settlement. If we're going to place rock breakwaters or any other type of breakwater unit out there, we want to know if that material is going to settle and consolidate. You know, if you're trying to attain a certain elevation for wave protection and you're in a siltier area and you have something like a foot of settlement, you need to take that into account. Otherwise, you're going to put your rock out there, it's going to sink and you're not going to achieve your goals. But here, it's pretty sandy. It's poorly graded sand, but it is sand. So, you know, we only think we're going to have 2 to 3 inches of settlement. So should be good on that. Then we wanted to look at all the special aquatic habitat, which is a couple different pieces. We have our wetland delineation. So on the top, you can see subtidal estuary and emergent wetlands in yellow, intertidal estuary and emergent wetlands in red. And then on the bottom, you can see that we do have some pretty healthy seagrass beds out there. So we needed to take all that into account when we're looking at design. And then one other extra thing that we did was work with Hart Research Institute, and had Dr. Pollack and Dr. Palmer both look at this site and give us some feedback on whether or not we could do any oyster habitat, because the client and as well as us wanted to, but unfortunately did not get good feedback on that. Just wasn't a good area, so we weren't able to do that. Then we look at the bathymetry, topography, what's going on out there. We do that by gathering data from any source we can publicly for our regional domain, and then going out there and doing our own surveys there locally, right in the project area to build our domain up. Once we have all that, we start looking at wind and water levels, start looking at what storm scenarios we want to design to. So you can see here we take data from some of the different gauges up in Port A here, and then close to Packery Channel down here in the south. And then we run an extremal analysis to see what those water levels are and what those wind speeds are going to be at different return periods. Once we do that, we can start building out our different cases. Typically, we would do wave modeling, but because this area is kind of protected from the north and has a limited fetch from the southeast, we just kind of did an analytical method here using a program that we use called ACES. So we just input depth, wind speed, and fetch, and it outputs wind-generated waves. So you can see over here what our wave heights would be on different cases. And then typically we would analyze vessel wakes since this is such a heavily traversed recreational channel. However, as I mentioned earlier, the current no wake zone is out here. The county is planning to move it way back here, which will probably make people really happy, but it's going to keep us from having to deal with vessel wakes out there. So we decided we didn't need to analyze that since that was going to be happening here in the future. Once that's done, we got our waves. We want to look at circulation, make sure that we're not going to have any negative impacts by putting any breakwaters or any other structures out there in the water. So this is just kind of an overview of what our grid would look like when we do circulation modeling. You can see it goes all the way up here kind of to the port and down here to the south into the Laguna and then offshore. And when we do that circulation modeling, we want to calibrate and validate our model. So we use a couple different gauges here. Conrad Butcher has a velocity gauge that they've used in the past, and then Packery has some velocity data. We take a look at what time frame is going to be closest to verified water surface elevation and predicted, and find that space when that difference is minimized. And so you can see when we did that, the green is the water surface elevation from the gauge, and the blue is the water surface elevation that our model came up with. And then you look over here at the error statistics and index agreement. We want that between 0 and 1. We want it as close to 1 as possible. So 0.99 is pretty good. So we were happy with that. And then we also did the same thing for velocity. Green is the gauge and blue is the model. And then our index agreement was 0.96. And then the last thing as far as modeling goes, we also wanted to look at sediment transport, make sure that we weren't going to have any major negative impacts on the existing sediment transport of the site. So it's a much smaller domain because of the complexities with sediment transport and those processes and how long it takes to do some of the computing on that. So you can see it's pretty close to just right around the area of the park right here. And there's the grid and then the existing model here on the right. These are just existing conditions. So once we had all that data, all our models built, it was time to look at like what we were actually going to put out on the site to accomplish the goals of the county. We knew there was going to be some challenges. We weren't sure about using rock as a breakwater, but this is kind of the baseline, at least here in Texas. Most of our breakwaters and other structures like this, like jetties, are rock. So we wanted to at least include it for comparison. But we also wanted to include some different units. Such as these are called WADs. It stands for wave attenuating devices. They're all supposed to double as kind of like reef habitat. And then the other one we looked at was something called an Atlantic reef maker. And it's a little interesting. It's piling supported, so it's concrete discs stacked together on piles, and they can build these to be oyster habitat or fish habitat. But obviously there's challenges here. You know, the main one here is that we have seagrass right here, and then we have a channel right here. So we don't want to impact any of the habitat that's out there now. But we also don't want to impact the channel. So we really, looking at the geometry, the topography here, you can see in some of these areas, these numbers go from 1.5 to 4.9 to 7.7 pretty dang quick. So it drops off right into the channel. The drop off is a lot quicker up here on the north side. It's a little bit slower, but still pretty quick on the south side. But there were some shelves that we could work with there, give us a little bit more flexibility. And then you can kind of see it on this aerial. You got some pretty good seagrass beds here along the shoreline. And then you can see the color change where it just falls off here into the channel. So really, the geometry of this was kind of dictated to us by the site conditions, but we still wanted to look at a couple different layouts, the different units, to see if there was anything we could do that would work either better or worse to accomplish the goals of the county here. So you can see some of these are rock, rubble mound, looking at just wads, looking at just reef makers, looking at having no gap protection versus having gap protection, and then down here a hybrid of both reef makers and wads. And so I'm going to show a couple cross sections. One thing to note, I would keep your eye right here on the footprint of these units. And as I flip through these, just looking at the different base width of each one. So that was rock, this is the wads, and then this is the reef makers. So you can see quite a big difference between them. And looking at this, it's pretty easy to understand why these reef makers became so compelling to us because of the geometry of the site. They're much narrower footprint, piling supported. But we still run all these things through a set of evaluation criteria. So this is developed with Nueces County, the GLO, stakeholders, and the project team. What criteria is most important for the site? Obviously, performance. Number one thing, we want to reduce wave energy reaching the shoreline and mitigate that erosion that's happening. Number two, habitat enhancement. That was twofold. So we want to avoid impacts to the existing habitat, but we also want to improve habitat, so hopefully increasing, allowing that seagrass to be protected and continue growing, allowing that marsh to continue growing. Capital costs is pretty straightforward. Unintended impacts, that's what we kind of called impacts to navigation. So when I talked earlier about the rock, using that as breakwater material, that wide footprint, we were a little worried that if that channel continues moving before we can stabilize the shoreline, we could potentially have scour and those rocks could fall into the channel, which would then be a navigation issue. So that's where we captured that. And then aesthetics, it's a public park, heavily recreated. We wanted to make sure that we accounted for the look and feel of the park. So what we do is we run these through an alternatives analysis. This is, again, developed with the county, the GLO, all the project stakeholders. What are the most important criteria and how important are they? So you can see each one of these criteria has a different weighting factor. This is developed between the whole project team. Everyone has a different opinion on what's most important. Obviously, Nueces County has the biggest say, but we take everyone's opinion into account and kind of weight it out. And so these all total up to 1. And then each one of these is scored for each different alternative, and then weighted, and then you come out with the weighted total score over here. And so one that ended up winning was the hybrid between the wads and the Atlantic reef makers. That scored the highest, followed closely by just the wads. So we ended up going with 2B, wads and Atlantic reef makers. And this is kind of a rendering of what it hopefully will look like. You can see the wad units here on the south side, the reef makers on the north side, and then the reef makers that are the gap protection. And then you have the public fishing pier that's also part of this project. So another thing to note is that a lot of folks, you can see some of these walking pathways through here. Folks will park like this guy right here and just wade out. And so you can see these little marsh plantings. These are renderings. This is what we're planning to do. Once we're done with this, we don't want people to continue walking through all that, trampling down marsh, trampling down seagrass. So we want to get them up out of the water onto this fishing pier, fishing into a little bit deeper water, and hopefully not impacting the habitat out there. And then this is just kind of the same idea here, just looking down the shoreline. We've got the pier here with the reef maker breakwaters here protecting the newly planted marsh habitat. So we just got our permit last week, which was awesome. 7 months, pretty good time. And then hoping we can go out to bid this summer and have this constructed by the end of the year. But be happy to answer any questions you'll have. So that material is usually already spoken for by being placed on, that material is usually already spoken for. It's usually placed on Whitecap Beach, but also placing material would kind of be an issue there with the seagrass, all the habitat there. Yeah, no, we weren't looking at doing any fill, just stabilizing the existing and mitigating any future erosion.
And for our final talk of this session, we have Daphne White presenting Reef Resilience, investigating the biological, chemical, and physical impacts of sediment on oyster reefs.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Sounds good. Never used a microphone. Hello, everybody. My name is Daphne White. I am a second-year graduate student at A&M Corpus Christi under the advisement of Dr. Keisha Barr in the Coral Reef and Ocean Health Lab. So I'm one of her only oyster students. But I'm in my second year, and I'm at the Heart Research Institute. But this project is heavily jointed with some folks here at UTMSI on the Restore grant, where we're studying a lot of oyster reefs in Texas. So today I'm going to be talking about some preliminary work for my dissertation and actually breaking down my 3 main research questions, talking about some of the main things I'm doing to answer those questions to report to TPWD, our end user management at the end. So with that, I'll get straight into that. A little bit of background, which a lot of y'all, especially here, already know. Oysters are really important. They protect us with their 3D structure against all the hurricanes that we're hit with in the Gulf, storm surges, sea level rise. One adult oyster filters 50 gallons a day, so translated to an acre of reef, that's 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools of water being filtered a day. So if we have a lot of reefs that are healthy, we'll have healthier water quality, healthy bays. They also provide habitat for a lot of juvenile game fish and other invertebrates, so they're really, really important habitat. And in 2020, they provided the U.S. with $30.6 million, so they're really, really important economic benefit to us as well. And Texas oyster reefs lately, however, have been declining, especially due to a few different synergizing stressors. So one thing that you're seeing here actually is dredging. And here in the top right, you can see a commercial dredge, which is a little wider than this one used for research, but basically the teeth at the bottom of the dredge actually are breaking up that reef structure so that those fishermen can actually bring them up to the boat. And this can cause a lot of degradation of the reefs physically, but also perhaps a lot of other factors like the abiotic stressor of sediment presence, because when the dredging is happening, there's an increased turbidity as the sediment gets zhuzhed up. So that's one of the many abiotic factors, but there's a lot of other things that these Texas oyster reefs are influenced by because of the variability from the northern to southern bays, with the variability of freshwater input or lack of circulation. So there's a lot of hypersaline bays in the southern areas. So there's just a lot of variability across the bays, which makes it very difficult for management to be able to understand both those abiotic and also biotic stressors like competition of sponges, especially in these bays, or if you get northern, more oyster drills and whatnot. So taking all of these into account, and especially looking at how sediment in this project is impacting those oysters across those reefs is really important. My research is hoping to take a multi-scale approach to do this. So we'll not only look across those reefs, but first, our first question is, how does sediment impact individual oysters? And I'll talk about that in a little bit, breaking it down. But the second question is looking across the reefs, how does sediment impact oyster recruitment? And then the third one is how the impacts of sediment are impacting the oyster community across the reefs. And I'll show which reefs those are in just a little bit. But first, to start at the individual level, we're figuring out how sediment impacts oyster growth, metabolism, and respirometry. To do this, we'll take individuals from select sites and actually expose them to different turbidity treatments. If we have time, we'll also expose them to sedimentation treatments. But we'll do this using the total alkalinity anomaly technique. which I'll break down a little bit later, but we're really trying to mimic this study where they actually study physical reefs in field, looking at water quality to determine how calcification is changing not only across the reefs, but how reefs could be changing the carbonate chemistry in the bays themselves. So we'll look at how they're responding at the individual level, but also we'll be doing some of this at select field sites and surveying the individuals to look at how they're growing and recruiting over time, and taking sediment cores to look at grain size and organic matter, and also use the sediment from those core samples to expose them to those treatments in the lab. So a little bit of a breakdown of what this paper did and how we're kind of using similar methods to build off of that. So here they use the oyster health data, like heights across or between their two sites. So what they did was they had the reef site and a control site, which we also do in this study. So at all 44 reefs, there's actually an adjacent or control site that's 20 to 25 meters away from that reef. And this is used to be able to have a comparison to see how those seawater dynamics are being either influenced by the reef or how the reef is maybe influencing that downstream adjacent site in the seawater chemistry. And specifically to look at that, like I said, we'll take water samples to look at total alkalinity and also measure, also sample for dissolved inorganic carbon. And if we do that and also drop SON to take some environmental parameters, we can actually calculate using a molar ratio what carbonate production or carbonate dissolution is happening at reefs. And in this figure from this paper, you see these two reefs and how they are dissolving or producing carbonate differently. But we'll be able to do this at each reef and adjacent site to see how they're changing across those sites, or how maybe the control or reef is influencing the other. So the second question that we're asking, expanding from that individual level to the cross community, is asking what are the impacts of sediment on the oyster community. So like I said before, we're going to be taking core samples at all 44 of these sites, and there's a mix of closed and open sites. All of these coordinates were given to us by TPWD, so we can actually report all of this information back to them for management. And from north to south, we have Matagorda Bay, San Antonio Bay, Mesquite Bay, Aransas Bay, with St. Charles as a secondary bay of Aransas, and it has only restored enclosed sites. So that's a separate factor we'll look at differently at the end. And then we have Copano as well here at the most southern point. So at each of these sites, we're going to be dredging, which is how TPWD also monitors the oyster reefs, to look at height data, abundance data, and things like that. And we'll also be doing quadrats actually at every single reef too. But the dredge data is the main part my project's going to be using to get that health metric across the reefs, as well as look at organic matter and grain size across the reefs, because a lot of literature shows that an abundance or a higher amount of siltier grain size sediments can really negatively hurt spat recruitment, and an overabundance of sediment in general can really smother oyster reefs in general. So this is why we'll be looking at those different characterizations of the sediment and how the sediment regime changes across the very, very dynamic bays and influences those oyster health metrics. Another way or health metric we're going to be looking at is recruitment, and not just recruitment, but post-settlement mortality across the reefs. So at each of those 44 sites in that last map, we'll have this little PVC tea tree, that's been pounded onto the reef. And on one side, it's going to have a few shells on string. And on the other side, it's going to have a PVC plastic recruitment tile. And these are going to be deployed every spring and fall recruitment season for 3 months, and then they'll be retrieved at the end of that season and looked at for community composition. And then also at select sites, those tiles will actually be put in those similar chambers for sediment treatments to look at post-settlement mortality across different sediment treatments as well in the lab. So this is what that looks like in the lab. We're in progress as of this fall. We'll be starting the first full retrieval and deployment, and that'll happen every year or every semester for 3 full sampling years. And here I wanted to show, this is a picture of some baby oysters that we've been experimenting with some larvae from the AgriLife hatchery to test not only in lab to see how they'd survive and grow and stuff, but also we've deployed some pilots in some of our bays to see how they do. But starting this fall, we'll be deploying these 2 substrates on those PVC poles at all of those sites. And the main reason we'll study recruitment, which y'all might be a little familiar with, is because of the oyster life cycle, depending on that hard substrate at that pedovelliger stage where they finally developed a foot to stick out and detect where they want to settle for the rest of their lives before they become a reef structure. And actually that's what that guy is here in this little yellow box, is a pedovelliger. And you can't see really well, but some of them have already put their foot down and started forming rings, which means they've successfully settled. And that's what we'll be looking for in the field. And this figure is appropriate for the eastern oyster, but in the East Coast, where we have a lot colder waters, it takes the oyster about 1 to 3 years to grow to a full adult size. Whereas here in the Gulf waters that are a lot warmer and saltier, they actually can grow up to an adult size in only like 6 to 12 months. So it's really important for management and restoration to understand these factors and how, especially sediment, which could be synergized with other activities like dredging and development, are impacting their success. And actually, I wanted to shout out Sink Your Shucks, which is a really amazing program at Hart Research Institute that recycles the oyster shells from restaurants that they're partnered with and actually puts them back in the bay. In St. Charles, at Goose Island State Park, not too far in Rockport. So there's a QR code if anybody wants to scan that and join. But also just let me know if you're interested in that or anything about my project. I would be happy to answer questions. Thank you. Yes, so on those tiles and on the shells on string, we will be doing a full composition analysis. So we'll be looking at everything. And then for sedimentation specifically, I didn't put it in this presentation, but at those same select sites that we're taking samples and actually looking at water chemistry over a 24-hour period, like that paper that I cited, we're gonna also put sediment traps there too. So we've been experimenting with nested designs because the sedimentation rates here are crazy, but we're gonna try. Oh, yes. Thank you.
All right, that concludes our session. It is now lunchtime for an hour and 15, and then we'll meet back in here at 1:15 for the Texas Gulf Coast Research Center that will be kicked off by Ed. Just a note too, we do have a max capacity in this auditorium of like